Hi and welcome back. In this video we're going to look at SQLite and how it works. Now, I've opened here the folder in Atom, and we've got the code folder and the venv folder. Remember, venv is just a Python installation. In the code folder, I've copied section 4's code, so it's got app, security and user just like we had in section 4 at the end. Outside either of these folders, I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to call it test.py. Now, I'm just calling it that because I'm going to go over with you how SQLite works, how we can interact with a SQLite database from Python, and that's not really part of our app. So I'm going to create a separate file just to show you how we can interact with SQLite. Okay? When we interact with SQLite, the first thing we want to do is import SQLite 3. This library, this set of code, is already in Python. We don't have to install it, but it includes a bunch of things such as allowing us to connect to a SQLite database and allowing us to run SQL queries and things like that. And also, in this video, we're not going to go too in-depth into how to build SQL queries, but we are going to cover some of that as well. Okay. Now, just importing SQLite 3 gives us the ability to connect and run queries and things like that, but it doesn't actually connect us to a database. So the first thing we have to do is we have to initialize a connection. And I'm going to create a variable connection, and this is going to be SQLite3.connect. And then here we can put inside a string the connection string, the URI, the Unified Resource Identifier for our database. Now, SQLite 3 works by storing all of its data in a file, and the file can be called whatever you want, but in my case I'm going to call it data.db. So we're going to be creating a file data.db inside our current directory, and that's going to be our SQLite database. If you use, for example, something like PostgreSQL or MySQL or other SQL databases, you'll know that these SQL databases normally are large and cumbersome, and also the data files occupy a folder's worth of stuff. With SQLite, it is light, so the only thing it occupies is a single file, and in that file it contains all of the data and all of the things it needs. That does mean that SQLite is substantially slower, particularly at writing data to the database, than its more professional counterparts. Okay, now that we've connected, we can do something like this, a cursor. A cursor essentially is like the cursor on the computer that you are seeing move right now. It allows you to select things and start things. So for example, we can tell the cursor to start at the top of a database and tell us the data in that database. That would be retrieving data from a database. So the cursor is responsible for actually executing the queries, such as the selection from a database or inserting into a database and things like that, and also storing the result. So the cursor is going to run a query and then store the result so that we can access the result. Okay. So let's look at the first SQL query to create a table in a SQL database. Well, I'm going to call the variable createTable, and this variable is going to be a string, and in this string we're going to put our SQL command. To create a table in SQL, we start with createTable. No surprise there. And then we give the table name, users, for example. And then, inside brackets, we specify the columns of our table. So remember, a table is just a set of columns and a set of rows. And we'll have some data in each row for the columns that the table is made up of. So our users may be made up of an ID, which is going to be an integer, a username, which is going to be text, and a password, which is going to be text. So what this means is that the users table is going to have 3 columns. an ID column, a username column, and a password column. Whenever we create a new user and store it in that table, we're going to specify the ID, the username, and the password for that user. And then if we create another one, then we would also have to specify ID, username, and password, and so on. So essentially, this defines what's called a schema. How the data is going to look. What the data is going to look like. Okay, now that we've created the query, we have to run the query. So the way we do that is using the cursor. So we'll say cursor.execute and then create table. Okay. Okay, so let's run our program here and see what happens. So I'm going to go back to the terminal. I am running the virtual environment, although you don't have to. And then I'm just going to run python test.py. Okay, that's ran. Doesn't tell us anything. But as you can see, back in Atom, we've got now a file called data.db. Okay, so if we open this data.db, we can see that it looks very weird because it's not a text file. It is essentially a binary file, but it contains some things that we can read. For example, we've got table user, create table users ID int username text, blah blah blah. So we know that we've done something, okay, but we've not yet stored any data in this database, or indeed retrieved any data. So when we run our program, it doesn't tell us anything. So that's what we're going to do. Let's store some data in this database. For example, we can create our first user, which is going to be this one here, and each of the elements corresponds to one of the columns. So one is going to be the ID, Jose is going to be the username, and ASDF is going to be the password. Okay, remember, this user is just a tuple, is a Python data structure, but we have to insert the user into the database. So the insert query is going to be insert into the table and the values. Okay, so here's what's happening. This is a SQL query once again, and the way we build it is we say insert into the table that we want to insert values into, the word values, and then inside brackets, each of the values that we want to insert. So this one is going to be the ID, this one's going to be the username, and this one's going to be the password. Okay? Fortunately, we can leave it as question mark, and then when we run the query with the cursor, we just say insert query, and then user. And the cursor is smart enough to replace each of the values in the user tuple for the question marks, and we don't have to do anything else. So that's going to insert the user in the table there. Okay. Whenever we insert data, we have to tell the connection to actually save all of our changes into the disk, into the data.db file. The way we do that is by doing connection.commit. And at the end, it's also good practice to do connection.close to make sure that the connection is closed and it's not going to receive any more data, or it's going to be consuming resources while it waits for more data. Okay, so I've saved that. Now let's delete our data.db. That's an important step, because we're going to create a table, and if that already exists, then we're going to have a wee problem. And then let's go back to our terminal and run python test.py again. And now, surely we expect something slightly different to be inside data.db. And indeed. As you can see, we've got the same table users, blah blah blah, but now we've got our first value, which is Jose ASDF. Notice how the ID is nowhere to be seen. I wonder where it is. But don't worry, I'm sure it is there somewhere. Okay, so now we are able to insert a user into the database. Let's see how we can insert many users. I'm going to create a variable called users, and that's going to be a list of tuples. So I'm going to copy this one there and change the values slightly. Just to show you how you can insert multiple rows in one go, this is quite a useful thing to be able to do. Okay, now we've got 2 users here, and what we're going to do is exactly the same insert query, but now we're going to say cursor.execute many insert query users. And all that's going to do is cursor.execute, but once for each user in our list. Fairly simple, eh? Okay, I'm not going to run that because you know that that's going to work, or at least you should trust me that that's going to work. The last thing I want to show you is how to retrieve data out so that our program can actually tell us something. So select query is going to be another variable, which is going to be another SQL command. And to retrieve data from a SQL database is really simple. All you do is select star from, and then the table, users in this case. Select star is going to go to the users table and is going to find every row, and then it's just going to select all of the data in each row. Here we could say, for example, select ID, and then it would only return the ID values for each row. With select star, it returns all of the column values. You can play around with that if you wish. And then we're going to say for row in cursor execute, select query, print row. So really what we're doing is we are running this select statement, and we're storing the results of that in the result of this command, and then we're going to iterate over that just as if it were a list, which it is essentially. And then we're going to say for each row in that, we're going to print it out. Okay, once again, delete data.db, and we're going to run this again. And now something should come out, which indeed it does. The 3 users that we've inserted come out. So Jose, Rolf, and Anne with their respective passwords. Okay, so now we've looked at how to insert single items into a database, how to insert multiple items, and how to retrieve them. Over the next few videos, we're going to extend our API to make use of this new knowledge, and we're going to be allowing users to sign up, and then after that, we're going to be writing and reading our items from a database. Now, this is going to make our code substantially longer, but there's going to be a lot of duplicated code. For example, you always need a connection and a cursor. You always need to commit and close the connection. So, as you can see, it's not really very complicated. All you need is a query and to execute it. And then make sure to commit so that it's actually saved to the disk. And that's it. So, we're going to be extending our API over the next few videos, and I'm excited to guide you through that. So I'll see you in the next video.